From marks on cave walls to expansive canvases in galleries, we have aspired to record a connection with our surroundings, communicating the experience and aesthetics of the natural world, of place and time. This is the essence of landscape painting, and whether you're a beginner or a more experienced painter, I hope this film will encourage you to spend time outdoors, in the landscape. There's no better way to find inspiration and connect with your subject. So join me at Chichester Harbour in Sussex as I sketch and paint this wonderful landscape. I know the place well, and I've painted it many times. It's easy for me to be inspired here, and if you're struggling for inspiration, visit your favourite places. Don't paint anywhere, paint somewhere. Well, I've come to the lovely little hamlet of Delkey, which is just on the harbour side here. And I've come here to get inspired, and that's going to be very easy to do because just to my right is the Fishbourne Channel, which is a part of Chichester Harbour that runs up here to Delkey. And what I'm going to do is walk down this rather muddy footpath. It's okay. I've got my wellies with me, so I think I'm going to be all right, and find a spot on the bank of the harbour side, and I'll get a nice view back up to Delkey. That's going to be a nice subject for me to do a quick painting of, or a quick sketch. And if you've not painted the landscape much before, and certainly if you've never painted outdoors on location before, it's a brilliant thing to do if you want to find inspiration. So many people contact me and say, Ollie, do you know what, I just can't find subjects to paint. And the reason for that, more often than not, is they're looking for photographs online that are the subjects that they think they want to paint and they think are already configured in a way that will look nice as a painting. Well, when you're actually out in the landscape and you're making a connection with your subject, believe me, you will find endless subjects to paint. You've just got to get out here and notice them. When you have an opportunity, get outdoors, bring a sketch pad, make some quick sketches. If you want to make a painting and you've got the ability to do that and you've got the time to do that, fantastic. But all you need is a pencil, a sketch pad, and off you go. You're in the landscape, you're with your subject, and you will find that inspiration comes very quickly. So let's head down the path and see what the harbour side has to say to us. Well, I've found a beautiful spot here on the banks of the Fishbourne Channel, this is, that runs up to a little hamlet called Delkey. Just in the distance there is the Crown and Anchor pub. It's a beautiful pub just sitting on the bank, but it's catching the sun and that's reflecting down into the shallows. The tide's just going out. It's going to be a perfect subject to do a quick sketch of. It's nice too because I can see the boats and their masts are just reflecting down into the harbour too. I've got the South Downs behind me that's all gone blue and soft and distant, and it's the perfect subject for a watercolour. And what I'm going to do with this quick sketch is use a technique called pen and wash. Now, if you're new to painting in watercolours, it's a technique where you make some simple washes on the paper, you put the colours down, and then you can put pen over the top, which helps to bring it all together. It's a really fun technique, and I think you're going to enjoy watching this one. Okay, now I'm going to work quickly with the sky and just put in some blue around the top here. There's some nice cloud that's just coming in, which is giving a little bit of extra information in the sky, and I want to get that in there. With some clear water, I'm just going to soften off some of these cloud shapes and let them run down the paper. Don't want hard edges everywhere. In some places it's quite nice. And then I'm picking up this warm shadow colour. It's a warm grey that I've mixed from French ultramarine and cadmium red. Dropped a little bit of yellow ochre in there as well. And it just suggests shadow underneath these clouds. I'm going to warm it up even further actually with a little bit of yellow ochre. A little bit more cadmium red. And then just come down over the top of the downs in the distance, because the downs are darker, and in watercolour we paint from light to dark because it's a transparent medium. I'm happy to bring that down over the top here, and then I can paint the downs once that is dry. I'm just going to go back in with my damp brush here and adjust some of these shapes. That was my chair, incidentally, sinking into the sandy banks here. Give it 10 minutes or so, and what will probably happen is I'll be completely submerged, but hey, it's all part of the fun of it. Okay, that's fine. I'm happy with that as a sky. Let's put in the sea here, and what I need to be careful is to make sure I leave some whites for reflections on these boats, and of course I need to make sure I go round them. I'm not too worried at this stage about being accurate because my pen will enable me to do that. It'll give some good definition to this once this is all dried. Must remember to leave some white here for the pub that's reflecting in this area of low tide. And vary your colours up a little bit, so add in some yellow ochre to this. It just makes it a little more grey. This is not all the same colour, that's really important to remember. Leave some whites in the paper, that gives your painting a little bit of sparkle. It looks nice. And I'm going to come down over the foreshore here because, again, this is darker, and I'm quite happy for this texture to suggest stones and bits of seaweed and things that collect on the foreshore. Now, you may have noticed that I'm sitting in a different position. The reason for that is my chair, unfortunately, no longer really exists. Certainly not as anything that is of any use to anybody. So I was just sitting over there on the mud flats. You may say not particularly sensible anyway, Oliver, and you may have a good point, but I thought we'd go with it, and it seemed to be working for a while, but it started sinking too far into the sand. Then I couldn't retrieve it, and here we are. I've got this nice little tuft of grass that I'm sitting on, and do you know what? These things happen when you're painting outdoors in the landscape. So don't think for one moment that it's a comfortable experience painting in the landscape, because when you're outdoors, these sort of things happen. And if your planning is as poor as mine, then it may happen to you too. But it's all part of the fun of it. You're in the landscape, you're experiencing being here, and this is a far better way to start to understand your subject and to understand the nature of landscape painting than just sitting down with Pinterest or with Google Images and finding a nice pretty picture to paint. Right, I'm just going to put in some of these background trees here, which are still in their winter colours. We'll have a little bit of shadow in there too. We have the dark tree here, but I'm just going to carry this wash over the top at the moment. I can go darker once this has dried, that is not a problem. Make sure I'm painting around the white of the Crown and Anchor pub. And now it gets very pale and very blue as it moves into the distance here. This is the South Downs behind us, or behind Del Quay, I should say. There's some warmer colour just down behind these boats here, which is trees, but I'm going to let those run up into the area that I've just painted, the South Downs. There's no need to have a defined edge there. And then at this side of the downs there's a bank of trees which you'll often find around Chichester Harbour. It's surprising how many wooded areas there are close to the banks of the harbour, which is saltwater. You know, this runs out into the English Channel. There's a lot of trees, a lot of them small stunted oak trees, interestingly enough, that have found a way of coping and surviving on the banks of the harbour. That's enough for the background, and while that's still wet, I'm going to move down into the area of foreground, and the sun is quite nice and bright here. It's catching the bank here. There's even a little bit of green in there, so I'm going to mix in some green just where the edge of the bank is here. This is seaweed and reeds that are just on the edge there. That's nice. That adds a little bit of colour in the corner there. Some coming down there too. And as I'm coming down the paper here, coming down into the foreground, what I'm doing is I'm using warmer colours, and that brings them a little further forward. Just a rough brush stroke here to suggest some warm grass here in the foreground. Now as we come down closer here, there's quite a lot of dark stones just here in the foreground. I quite like those. They add a bit of tonal difference, counter change just along this part of the painting. I'll carry a few more down here. I'm going to drop some darker tones into here as well, let those fuzz out a bit. That's quite nice. Now, I've just noticed that someone has walked out across the mudflats with a small bucket, I think. I don't think I'm going to put them in the painting, but I'm going to watch quite intently anyway, because they may start sinking in as my chair did. No, they seem to know what they're doing, unlike me. So let's move on. Let's carry on with the painting. Okay, now that this has started to dry, I'm just going to put a little bit of detail into the quayside buildings here. And when I say detail, I really am very careful not to put in too much, because it's in the distance. I'm painting a quick impression here of the scene. I'm not too concerned about fine details at this point. I need to change up this into a nice warm red colour for that roof, and it's catching the end of the building there too. There's a similar colour on the roof of the pub, and also the sun is just catching the end of the pier here. We bring those colours down into the quayside, around this boat here, around the one next to it. Oh, and then it gets quite bright here. I've just noticed the sun again is picking out the quayside here. So I'm going to mix up some yellow ochre. What you notice with quaysides is that as they come down towards the waterline, they tend to collect seaweed and algae, and they have a green look to them as they meet the water. So let's just indicate that as well. Let's just drop some colour into where these boats are. This one now is sitting almost completely out of the water, which is quite nice. This one here's got a nice splash of red on it, but I don't want it to be too obvious. It becomes a bit too prominent then. But I will just extend that through there where the sail is. That's quite nice. And then some parts of these boats have got shade on them, so I'm putting that in with a shadow colour. I usually use French ultramarine and cadmium red for this. It's a nice way of creating shadows and definition. It gives a nice zip to your whites by placing it next to them. There's the shadow on the side of the pub. Gives it some shape, some definition, and there's the terrace and area out of the front there. There's a little wall that runs behind there, a fence. So I'm just making simple marks because this is only an impression. That's all I'm trying to create at this point. Well, I'm just going to put in this dark tree now that will give some strong definition to the pub there. Runs through here as well. There's a dark tree in there too, so let's put that in. Now I've come to a point with the painting where most of the colours are established. It's what I consider to be a watercolour sketch because I haven't put a lot of detail in. I've allowed colours to run together. I haven't been too fussy about getting things precise and accurate. And the reason for that is quite simple. When you're outdoors painting on location, perhaps the most important thing that you can do is to try and quickly establish an emotional connection to your subject, to the landscape. What we want to be able to do is create an impression of the scene. And if you can identify what it is, whether it's birds squawking in the harbour, could be that, or it could be the boats at jaunty angles as the tide starts to go out, whatever it is that inspires you and makes you want to be here and makes you want to paint, well, that's what it is you need to record. And so creating something quickly and getting an impression of your feelings, your inspiration, is far more important than trying to accurately record every last little piece of information that you can. Now what I'm going to do while the geese, I'm pretty sure they're geese, have their little meeting out there on the mudflats and talk amongst themselves, I'm going to start putting some pen on top of these colours and to bring the sketch together, and then I think we'll have something at the end of it that is a nice representation of the scene, but more importantly, what I'm experiencing while I'm here, the enjoyment of sitting here on the edge of the harbour, looking at the sun catching the building and the boats, and just experiencing being here. That's the whole point of this. This is why we paint outdoors on location. It's a totally different thing to staying indoors and finding photographs to paint. That's not really landscape painting, in my opinion. That's just copying pictures. This is proper landscape painting, and it's great fun to do. So let's put some pen on here, and then we'll have a look at what we've got by the time we've finished. So I started putting some pen lines on here that just help to give it a little bit of extra definition, and I can sort of work my way through this area here, and it's quite dark up here at the end of the quayside, and it's very dark just through here, and I don't want to put too much work here or it will just seem a little bit unnatural and obvious, but just something through there. And I can go over that with a bit more paint if I need to soften it back. But it is dark there. That is a really dark area of the quayside. It's now actually on mud, but I might have to reflect that down a little bit. But I can make these alterations at a later date. The important thing is to get this impression down quickly while I'm here. Normally, at home in the studio, I would be putting these masts in with a fine brush and probably some titanium white paint that is opaque paint, but I don't have any of that with me, so I'm just using the pen to indicate where they would be. And I may just pick out the edge of some of these clumps of seaweed and stones and things that have gathered here on the mudflats. What you have to be careful of when you do this is that you just don't go crazy and start putting it everywhere. Just pick out a few. Just helps to give a little bit of modelling, a little bit of definition to the foreground area. And again, don't work your way right across the painting with this, because if you remember, we want our focal point still to be around the pub and the dark tree, and if we put too much detail down here, then it starts dragging the eye to other parts of the painting. So just be mindful when you come over the top of paint with a pen or ink like this to give it some definition, not to go overboard with the marks that you're making. I'm really getting to the point now where I don't think I need to do too much more with this. I can make a few adjustments to it later if I need to, but in terms of capturing something that inspired me when I arrived here, it does the job. Well, I'm really happy with that. I really enjoyed making that quick pen and wash sketch. For me, it's captured my feelings of being here. I could have put a bit more detail in places, I could have taken a little bit more time perhaps, but that's not really the point of painting outdoors on location. The key here is to make an immediate response to your subject, to make a connection to it, and to convey quickly in a sketch or a small painting like this what it is that inspired you to paint it in the first place. So what I think I'm going to do now is walk back into Del Quay, and I might sketch one or two little subjects up there, maybe a boat or something like that. There's often interesting things around harbours, and I think I'm going to walk up there and see what it has to say to us. Well, I found this rather nice little pontoon at Del Quay, and it's the perfect place to come and do a little bit of sketching. If you're new to landscape painting, then sketching is probably one of the best things that you can do. It doesn't matter how much experience you have and how skilled you are as a landscape painter. Sketching is without a doubt the engine room of landscape painting. I can tell that if my paintings aren't quite coming together in a way that I would want them to, more often than not, it's because I haven't spent enough time recently sketching. Now, when you're out in the landscape, you'll find that there's a huge amount of different subjects that you can sketch. Down here at Del Quay, I've got boats on the mudflats, I've got little birds and waders coming in out of the channel, trees on the bank, nice buildings on the quayside. And when you're sketching, it doesn't have to be all about big views and big grand landscapes. The details are just as important, and often with my sketchbook I like doing that. I like dialing down into the detail of the landscape, and sketching is great for that. So all you need is one of these, just a sketchbook, a pencil, pen sometimes. If you want to put a bit of colour on, you can do that with some watercolour or whatever medium you want. But really, this is all you need to get started. Now, the key when you're sketching is to make as quick an impression as you possibly can. Sketching is perhaps the most direct interface that you have with your subject, the landscape. So be quick, be immediate, sketch something, move on to something else, make as many sketches as you can, and get the most out of your time in the landscape. I'm just sketching in this rather nice little red boat here. It caught my attention just as I walked down here, just because of the colour, and I just like the angle that it's sitting on as the tide's gone out. And it's a good subject to sketch this, because it challenges your drawing skills, which are tremendously important for landscape painting. It asks some questions of whether or not you're observing correctly, because in order to draw this boat accurately, which is a difficult shape, it's foreshortened slightly. You can see, I can see the back of the boat here, but it means that you have to observe very carefully in order to get this looking something like a boat. And this is the problem when, certainly with subjects like boats, if it doesn't look like a boat, it just looks unseaworthy, and you just think, well, that's going to sink as soon as it takes to the water. So you need to get these things right. And there's some white superstructure here, just where the little cabin sits down on top of the hull. And we can just see this little bit of cabin disappearing, because we're essentially looking at the underside of the boat as it's leaning over here on the sand. There's a little bit of glazing in there. Little ladder that's coming up the back of the boat. So let's put that in too. And of course, remember that it's tilting over, so these rungs on the ladder are going to be sloping relative to the horizontal. as are the verticals. These little railings, they're all just leaning over slightly. And when you're making a sketch like this, the key is really not to worry too much about making a masterpiece here. What you're doing is simply just trying to get down and record some detail, some information, but most of all, you're sharpening your observation skills. It's quite dark here, so let's just put in a little more shading. And here's a little cabin door, so again this has got to be sloping down. Like so, and again that's quite dark, so I'm just going to leave a gap there where that little piece of railing is. I'm just using a softer pencil now just to put some shading in here on the side of the boat. It's significantly darker at the bow here, so I'm just going to put a little bit more shading into that. And this is the same watercolour sketch pad that I used when I was sketching down by the harbour side just earlier, and it's got a bit of texture to it, but that's fine. It adds quite a nice look to the sketch, so that's no problem. I'm going to leave it slightly lighter under here, even though tonally it's about the same as what's on top, i.e. the red, so it's blue here, and it just gives it a little bit of differentiation that enables you to see that there are two colours on the hull of the boat here. But it really is quite dark as it comes down underneath the boat here. There's a very slight shadow here, and I'm going to put that in too. I'm just suggesting a little sand and seaweed and stones and things that have just collected on the shore side here. It just helps to give a little bit more context to the sketch. Now this is interesting. Just as I'm sketching this little red boat here, there's a boat just tucked behind it, and a gentleman's doing some very diligent repairs. I think he's cleaning underneath the hull. But he just walked back out this way and returned, wait for it, with his bicycle. And yeah, he's just taken it out into the shallows, and I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. Are we going to get sailing or cycling? And I'm going to let you into a little secret. This is why sketching outdoors in the landscape is so much fun. The sketch that I'm making here, and in fact, pretty much all my sketches, I never sell them because they're packed full of memories. You're concentrating on your subject, and then all of a sudden these intriguing little events occur, and you can put this sketch away for a few years, but when you pull it back out again and have a look at it, you'll remember the guy cleaning the boat and the cycle incident, and it all comes back to you. Don't think of landscape painting and sketching just purely about making pretty pictures. It's all about the process. It's what happens while you're making those pictures, while you're making those sketches, that makes this such a wonderful thing to do. I'm just going to put a little bit of shading on this side of the cabin because it's not catching the light as the end of the cabin and the end of the hull are, so that needs to be a little bit darker, and then a little bit of shadow there where the ladder is against the hull. We've got a rope that comes down here that's just sitting on the sand. There's little bits of seaweed on it. I quite like putting things like this in. I'm not even sure if... No, there's none there, but it just looks nice. And you can do this while you're sketching. You're creating, you're making things up as you go, but you're also trying to provide a reasonably accurate rendering of what's here. There's some marker buoys sitting on the sand here actually. It's quite nice. Let's put those in. That one seems to be sitting down a bit more. Then what I must do is put in some of this rigging. That's important. That one's not quite in the right angle. That's better. It's running downhill a little bit more. And then we have more ropes coming up here. I'm not trying to put every single one of these in. There's no need for that. Just an indication that they're there helps the sketch. Helps to describe the boat. tell you what I am going to do is just put in another little boat that's sitting out. This one's still floating. It hasn't quite reached the banks yet, so it's just sitting there. It's just a nice shape, and it just adds a little bit more interest to the sketch, but it's in the background, so I'm going to put it in quite simply. It's got a darker blue tiller at the back, and it has a blue stripe just along here. I'll indicate that. Rope coming off here, another little marker buoy. Well, I'm just going to make a couple of pencil marks here that suggest there's a little bit of a reflection. And then the shoreline just along there. Do you know what? I don't think I want to put too much more in here. When you're making a quick sketch like this, all you really want to do is capture the essence of this. Get a sense of the subject, a sense of the place, and a sense of this particular moment in time, if you can. It's very easy to become over-concerned about detail and getting things right. And it's not really an art type of word, right? There's not much right or wrong. Of course, you want some accuracy when you're drawing shapes like this, but don't be too worried about it. The most important thing by a mile is you are out here sketching and you're having a go. And the more you do it, the better you become at it. So I think I'm going to leave it there. I don't think there's too much more to do. Now, little waders just come onto the mud flats. I can't quite work out what it is. It's pecking at the sand, and it's helping itself to a nice bit of lunch. And I'm going to put that in the sketch, because this is what sketching's all about. It's not a frozen moment in time while you're outdoors in the landscape. I've just had some paddleboarders go past again. Fantastic. I haven't put them in my sketch, but I could just as easily stop and sketch those too. Things come, things go, and you can respond to that in your sketchbook. Because there's so much information when we're outside in the landscape, I've got the South Downs behind me, a lovely vista, and all these boats and pebbles and muck on the foreshore. All this information is quite overwhelming. Sketching helps you to simplify, and it helps you to edit. And you make a selection on what you want to record and ultimately what you want your viewers to see if you're showing people your work. But most importantly, with a sketchbook, you're building up a whole series of little sketches, information, inspiration that you can go back to and build up at a later date into larger paintings if you want. It is an invaluable thing to do if you want to make progress as a landscape painter. Well, I've decided not to put the paddle borders in. That's just one thing too many, but I think the little bird there on the foreshore, that's going to get included. So I'm just going to sketch that in now. It all contributes to the place and the moment. So look out for little things like that. I've got a few other little visitors that have decided to pay me a visit. As always, they're very welcome. The more the merrier. It adds to the fun of things. And if you can get approval of your sketch from the local wildlife, then so much the better. Well, I've really enjoyed making that little sketch, and I think I'm going to call it a day for the time being. It's coming up to lunchtime, and I'm just a stone's throw from the Crown and Anchor pub, which I was making a quick watercolour sketch of earlier. So I think it would probably be rude not to just slip in there for a quick pint. Well, it is a beautiful spring afternoon here in Chidham, and I'm just looking across the Bosham Creek to the lovely little village of Bosham. And I'm just going to do a quick watercolour painting, a sketch really, of this scene. And all I'm trying to do is just get some colours down and get my impression of the scene established. I've wet the paper here, and I'm just going to drop in some warm tones here for the clouds. It's just starting to warm up now that we're coming towards sort of mid-afternoon. Then we'll put some blue in, we'll allow that to run in to the clouds. They're very, very faint. There's just a suggestion of them really, but I want to put them in. They are there. A bit more blue through here. And then it's getting warmer again as we come down towards the horizon. And so I'm just going to paint down into the church and cottages that are on the far bank there. I'll wet that whole area and I'll just keep going, I think, down the paper. And I just like to get as much of the paper covered as I can, and then I can just start working in a few details. But just get it established as much as you possibly can. These reed beds in the foreground, which are quite nice, they're darker in tone than the reflected water and mud flats in the channel, so I might as well bring that all the way down over there. That's absolutely fine. I'm looking out for any slight colour changes. It just gets a little bit more blue through the middle of the channel there. So while this is still wet and I can still work that, I'll just drop that in. You have to be careful sometimes when you're painting outdoors in the landscape, certainly on a windy day and when the sun's out, because this can start drying on you very quickly, and it's a good idea not to go back into an area that you've painted if it's starting to dry, or you will get some funny shapes and runbacks. But you'll experience more of that the more you start to paint and understand how this sort of rather funny medium of watercolour works. But that's got the sky in, that's got an area established for the water, and what I like to do now is just allow that all to dry. That's a base wash all across the paper, let it dry, and then you can start putting a little bit more detail in, a few more washes to start bringing things together and making sense of this. Okay, I've got some colours mixed up here. Just a sort of warm yellowy mix of yellow ochre and a little bit of cadmium red, a little bit of ultramarine, and I'm just going to put in some washes on the sides of these buildings, and I can put more detail in due course, but this is just another base wash that I'm trying to put in here. Vary these colours up as you go along. There's a nice brick red colour on those houses that are on the edge of the quayside at Bosham. So I want a nice colour for that. That's it. There's a few windows in here. Again, I don't really want to be too fussy about this because this is in the middle distance, and having too much detail like windows and things like that is just going to be too much information at a distant part of the painting. A few chimneys, they'll go in. The roofs are red across here, but this one's in shade, so it's slightly darker. And I'm letting all these colours run together. That's quite nice. There's little bits of white and things in here. Just under here's an area of grass. I'm going to let that run into the houses. That's nice. It just stops us having an obvious edge there. And then we're back to this house here, which is quite prominent, and the windows there actually are quite obvious and evident, so I might put those in a little bit more detail. How many are there? Let's have a look. There's 6 that I can see that are obvious. And then on this side of the church are some trees, but I don't want to paint those in just yet. I'm just going to paint that out with some water and leave that edge nice and soft, and I can come back over that when I need to. Now, a lot of the buildings in here are starting to get shadow on the left-hand side of them. The sun's coming in from the right here. And that's fine, because with watercolour we paint from light to dark, and putting in the darker shadows once we've established the palest tones is important. What I will do is I will put on this sunlit colour. It's a warm yellowy colour on the Holy Trinity Church here, and again shadow down one side, but we paint over the top of that, and the same with the roof, dark over light, so we may as well paint that all in one colour. And then the houses that are in front of that have got the same stonework, so not quite the same strong red colour that you have on these buildings here, although the roofs are quite strong. But the actual buildings themselves, the walls, the elevations, they're paler in colour, similar to the church. Now, when you come to paint scenes like this that have a degree of complexity in them, the important thing to do is to simplify what's in front of you. And painting outdoors is brilliant for this, because you don't have the time to record every last little piece of detail. There's just too much. So stick with your initial inspiration. For me, it was the view across the channel to Holy Trinity Church. It just looks beautiful sitting there on the far bank, and that's what's inspired me to paint it. With that in mind, I then play down the detail everywhere else in the painting and try to focus more of it around the centre of interest. Painting outdoors in the landscape forces you to simplify. And what we're doing when we are painting outside like this is just trying to create an impression of the scene in front of us. Like I said when we were doing the sketch of the little boat over at Del Quay, we're not trying to create a masterpiece. In fact, just don't try and create a masterpiece, because you're going to find it too difficult. There's so much information here. There's doors, windows, chimneys, trees, little boats, gates. I can see pretty much everything from my position here on the far side of the channel. And you'll just go crazy if you try to paint it all. So simplify what you're doing. Now, underneath this is a retaining wall that meets the bank of the channel. So I'm going to put that in now. I'm going to mix up the colours a little bit, just drop a few different colours in here and there. Don't get too fussy. Remember, you're just trying to create an impression, a response to what you're seeing in the quickest and the easiest way you can. And you can work from this later to create a painting, perhaps when you're in the comfort of your home and the wind's not blowing and you've got all these different things going on. But when you're in front of your subject, you're learning so much. There we are, that's the wall in. What I'm doing is putting in these pale colours, as you can see, because the dark colours are going to come round these and give these a bit more definition in due course. I was a little careless here and left that edge at the bottom of the church. I'm just going to fuzz that in with my finger. Yeah, that's okay. Now, while I've been waiting for that to dry, I've just re-wet the sky again, and I just wanted to get a little bit more blue in. The sky's changed a little bit, and the clouds thinned out, and I quite like it. And so I've just made a quick adaptation to that, and that does the job. Okay, now that's dried. I'm just going to put in some darker colour here. For these mud flats where the tide's gone out. And that runs all the way along the bottom of this retaining wall. Don't worry about leaving a few little bits of white in your watercolour of paper or the washes underneath just showing through. It gives the painting a nice texture. Look at that. That brush stroke there is lovely. It just creates the sense that there's light reflecting off the mud flats and the salt marsh here, and it just adds so much character to your painting. Don't worry about them. Don't paint them out. They happen when you move your brush quickly across the paper. And I'm using a rough paper here, and it helps to promote brush strokes like that. There, that's nice, I like that. Now, as I'm coming towards me, I'm just slightly warming up this colour. When you're outdoors painting the landscape, you will notice that in the distance, the colours seem to be quite cool. Everything, it becomes a little bit more blue, and this is why you get these blue hills in the distance, and we've all seen them, and it's about colour temperature. Keep your cool colours, your blues and cool greens, cooler greys in the background, and then warmer colours as you come forward in the painting. Because what you're trying to do here is create an illusion of 3 dimensions. There aren't 3 dimensions, there's only 2. The height and the depth of the piece of paper. But when you're out in the landscape, as we are now, what I'm looking at has 3 dimensions to it. And I have to find a way of translating that on this piece of paper. And one of the tricks that you have at your disposal is to observe the different colour temperatures at different parts of your painting. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that here, because we're just trying to get this established quickly. Let's drop some darker tones in here, particularly along the base, where it's just a little bit damper. That's it. Yeah. The sandbar is actually coming out here a little bit further. There we go. Now down in the foreground here, there's an area of foreshore, which I'm pretty sure is salt marsh. And it's a wonderful biodiverse habitat for all manner of different species. And it's quite rare. There aren't many areas now in the UK where salt marsh is thriving. And so it's rather nice to see it. But it grows, it looks like grass, but it's full of interesting little plants and species that grow here. And I'm changing my brushstroke now. You can see I'm painting up. This is much closer to us, so we can start to have some detail in here. There's plenty of different colours in here, so change your wash as you go along. Don't let it all be one colour. Add a little bit more blue to that. Now over here it just becomes more yellow again, and I think the sun's just catching it up here. But there's an interesting little channel that's just running through here, and I quite like that. So I'm just going to suggest that. A couple of simple brush strokes. There we are. I don't need to do too much more than that at this moment in time, but just while that's drying up, I'm going to put a little bit more work into the area of water here, because certainly running through here is a shallower area that's almost exposed sand now. It's the same just running through here too. While that's drying up, I'm just going to drop in some dark tones here while this is still wet. And you can see they all run together, and it's nice. It's creating a soft edge, but just a little bit of detail at the same time without being too obvious. Just adds a little definition, a little bit more modelling to this particular part of the painting. Okay, what I'm going to do now is just put in some work on these buildings here, and there's a chimney there. The roof is quite a strong colour. Some little gables down here too. Comes up over there like that. Down that side, chimney there, roof. You know, I'm not trying to be too detailed. I'm just trying to record some simple shapes here just to give this some definition. It's a bit darker on this side, and it comes down here. There's a little window just in here. We've got a darker roof on this building here. And also over here, we've got a darker roof. Side of this chimney is darker. These chimneys are darker. Darker roof in here too. Okay, now the side of the church here is really quite dark, so I'm getting that in with a strong colour. It's just burnt umber and French ultramarine, but it's a very strong value in there, and I like that. It gives a little prominence to these chimneys that are in front of it. And there's just a little tree behind here, so I'm going to put that in, let that all run together. It's quite nice. Now there's still a lot of exposed branches on these trees, and there's a nice stand of them just here. I want to put those in with not too much detail. It's just a little bit warmer on this side. And then with a small rigger brush, I'm just going to make a few little suggestions of branches growing up through here. There are quite a lot, and I like this grey broken wash here. It's just suggesting that these trees are full of sort of mass winter branches ready to receive their new spring clothes. Now this one runs into one that is a bit more, has some green on it, and I have the same thing on this side of the church too. So tree in here, but it's quite dark. It's now a very dark green that sits on that side of the church. I like that. It's a strong tone against this house here. Leave a couple of gaps in there. You need to not make it too dense. And there's still a little bit of green through here. It really is quite dark here on this side, actually. It's even darker than I initially painted it. And so let's just drop in a bit more dark colour there. This tree just comes down slightly in front of the one behind it. There's a few shrubs and things growing around the base there. And there's a dark green hedge that runs just in front of the church. And it's the other side of this building here. Yeah, it's in there. And then these trees are still coming down in front of the church itself. Oh, just put my hand in my painting, but never mind. These things happen. Getting a bit shady in there. There's a little window catching the light there. Now, unfortunately, the cloud seems to have come over a bit, and it's got quite cold, and the shadows have fallen away from the buildings, so they don't have the same three-dimensional look to them. But I can remember where they were. I can remember that the light was coming in from this side, and I've put some in anyway just to help the painting read a little bit better, and also to trigger the memories of standing here where it's nice and warm. But sometimes you have to do that. The weather is not always going to be your friend when you're painting on location. Tide times aren't always going to be your friend. You need to check them for sure and make sure you don't get on the wrong side of them, but these things change. Just make sure you make notes, or keep in mind what things looked like, or even use your phone. If it's got a camera on it, take a few quick shots, and then you've got those as references to work from while you're sketching on location, or even if you go and sketch it again when you get home. I've just been putting some shadows, you can see with this sort of grey-purple colour on the sides of buildings. I need to put one on the side of the church here, because that was in shadow there, and I'll come over the roof as well. Bit of a shadow there was just in there with the tree, and it's just starting to give some definition to the area of buildings. There was a shadow falling across this sandbar as well, which I quite liked, and I'm just going to put that in there. Again, it just gives a little more definition to this area. Actually, I'm looking closely now, and there is a tree just growing in front of the church there. Now I'm going down to my rigger brush here, and I'm going to put in the spire on the church tower. So I need to be fairly careful with that. It's a prominent feature. And while this is a very loose impression of the scene, sometimes it pays to take a little bit of care with some of the more prominent, easily recognisable features in the landscape. There's a little bit of light colour on this wall here as well, so I must put that in. Now I've got to a place where it's taking on the appearance of a finished painting, but it just needs a few details to lift it. And I'm just going to let everything dry and then put in one or two crisp details here and there. And I'll be focusing those around the centre of interest, which is Holy Trinity Church in Bosham. I'll put a little bit of information to help this read a little bit better, but not much. Very few brushstrokes, but just enough to give it a little bit of a lift, a little bit of sparkle. Okay, so just a few little areas of detail. There's some windows here, and I think it's a sort of conservatory or orangery or that type of thing that is just fronting out onto the harbour, which is rather nice if you live there. And we don't want to put too much detail into things like windows. It can just have a tendency to bring things too far forward, but we just want a little suggestion. There's another one just further down there on the church, one on that side. Got the weather vane up here. That's nice. And then with the dark tone, I'm just going to put some dark shadow under some of these roofs here. We'll go back to our shadow colour. There was a shadow just on that side of the chimney. It's important when you're doing this not to overwork your painting. It can be very easy to spend a lot of time fiddling around with a small brush, putting a little bit of detail here, a bit of detail there. And before you know it, it's in the wrong place, and the eye is not looking where you would want it to look. Now there's just a little bit of intricate brickwork, it seems, on the quayside here. I don't want to put every one of these in because it would just look too regimented and organised, and that never looks good in a painting. So just suggest a few of those marks in and leave it. It really is quite dark along here as well, where I guess seaweed and things that have washed up at high tide have been deposited next to the harbour wall. In fact, it's generally like that all the way along here, but what you mustn't do is do this all the way along. If we were to put a black line all the way along here, you've no idea how bad it would look. It just is too regimented, and you need to allow the viewer to make their own mind up about things. Don't spell everything out. All we're trying to do is create an impression. A little bit of work here on that sandbar, which is nice. And we'll put a little bit here too, where, again, a few things have collected, but not too much. We don't want too much of that. In fact, I think that's probably a bit too heavy there, so let's just knock that back. Take a step back and see whether or not it needs anything else, and it does. It just needs a few marks through here. quite a lot going on there. And also, I'm going to put these in because they are very much a feature of harbours. There's a lot of little mooring marker buoys here where we moor or tether our boats to. You make your mind up on that one. Now, interestingly, there's almost no reflection here at all, and that is a function of the fact that the water, the surface of the water, is disturbed by the wind, and that ripples the surface, and so you don't get so many reflections. I was going to drag those down and have them reflecting in the water, but that's not how it looks at the moment, so they are going to have to stay like that. Now, I'm going to put a little bit of work in here, but almost, I say a little bit of work, it really is a little bit. It's almost nothing, but it's just enough to break up this area a little bit, gives it a little bit of texture, and then perhaps a little scrape up here like that. One last thing that needs to be done is the darker side to the church tower. And that will give it a really nice crisp definition around our centre of interest. Well, I'm happy with that as a quick impression. I think that's enough work for the time being. The wind really has picked up. It's getting quite difficult to paint now. But I like it, and I might put a little bit more work along here. There's a few boats and bits and pieces along this side of the quay, but do you know what? I might just leave it as it is, because it's done what I wanted it to do, which is just capture a sense of the place at this particular moment in time. Well, what a strange afternoon. You just can't legislate for the weather sometimes. It had come over all windy and cold, and there was no light whatsoever, and I thought, well, we're probably getting to a point there's not too much more to do. So packed everything up. And as you can see behind me, the clouds cleared away, the sun's come back out. In fact, the wind's dropped too. It's sort of almost becalmed. But this is what landscape painting, and particularly landscape painting outdoors, is all about. Nature is alive, it changes, it moves, and it's just not going to stay put because you want to paint it in a certain way. So you've got to be able to adapt. You've got to be able to roll with these changes. And the way to deal with this is not to be too worried about the finished product, the painting or the sketch. While of course it's important that you've captured what you wanted to, the most important thing by a mile is the process that you've been through to do that, because that's where you're learning. It really helps to have a camera with you, and you can take a couple of little quick reference shots that will help you if you then want to make a painting at a later date from what you've done on location. But the key is you've got to be here. You've got to experience the vagaries of the weather. It's what makes painting outdoors fun. And in the process of doing this, you will observe, you will learn to understand the landscape, and perhaps this is the most important thing, you will start to establish an emotional connection to your subject. Well, I've really enjoyed my day painting and sketching down at Chichester Harbour. We started off at Del Quay on the banks of the Fishbourne Channel there, and it was beautiful, and it was nice to do a pen and wash sketch. After that, we moved up into Del Quay itself, and there were so many different subjects to sketch. So much going on, and the important thing there was just to capture the moment, capture some of the detail, and to use your sketchbook to feel your way into the landscape. And finally, we finished here in Chidham, but looking towards Bosham behind me, which is just magnificent. And it's good that we're finishing on this slightly calmer note with the sun out and the wind dropped, but the process has been fantastic. I wasn't entirely sure what sort of painting I would get out of it in the end, but I think it's okay. I might put a few marks on it when I get back. But it's been a great day's painting, a great day's sketching. I hope it's inspired you to take up landscape painting, or if you've already done a bit of landscape painting, maybe to get outdoors for the first time, get into the landscape and to sketch on location, to paint on location, where you have a far more visceral connection with your subject. Spend time in the landscape, find an emotional connection. Share your experiences through your sketches and paintings. It's relaxing, it's rewarding. Why don't you have a go?